on today's show, why due diligence matters. Part one of this week's series on product due diligence with nationally recognized product due diligence expert Barry Flagg, CFP, CLU, and CHFC. Hi everyone, I'm Steve Savant, syndicated financial columnist and contributing author to Backroom Technician and Insmark. Let's get down to business. Well, welcome to the show, Barry.
Great to be here, Steve.
Well, Barry, you are huge in the due diligence area. You're kind of like, you're one of my heroes. You have your product out there called Veralytics.
Correct.
And you've been doing this now for quite a long time. And give me a little background. I mean, this is in your blood. You're the son of an actuary. Talk a little bit about that.
Son of an actuary, youngest CFP in the history of the College of Financial Planning.
Wow.
Started my career in the fiduciary space, working in the pension investment advisory department of a full-service financial planning firm. That was my environment. When I moved on to spend some time in the life insurance business for some balance of experience, I have jokingly say I pulled my hair out trying to do the most basic fundamental research that was commonplace and a few keystrokes away in the investment business, but so difficult in the life insurance business.
One thing that people don't know about you, Barry, because all the information that I found online talks about Veralytics, due diligence, product analysis, reviews, things of that nature, but it does not talk about your own personal production. I mean, you are a top-of-the-table producer, have been for quite a long time.
20 years. So
when we're talking to Barry today, it's not just a person who's invented. We have many producers. We have had Curtis Cloak on this show, other people who have been top-of-the-table producers, but they also have invented software packages because they saw an absence in the market. There are a lot of people that say they do reviews, and I think that's great because due diligence is important. This is our segment. It matters. But you took it to another level because you didn't see, there was a space that was vacated. We hadn't really filled it yet. Talk a little bit about why is due diligence important for an advisor's practice? Why should he care?
It is vitally important now. 30 years ago, there was not that much difference between one whole life product versus another whole life product. The products were developed by actuaries in a dark room. They were much more regulated than they are today. With the advent of universal life, it provided a lot of flexibility, but flexibility can be both good and bad. The bad is that policies, as we know from the 1980s, were underfunded because planned premiums were set too low. In the 1990s, they were underfunded because planned premiums were set too low again. And so due diligence is critically important now, both just from a policy stewardship perspective, but also as a way of differentiating yourself in the marketplace, because due diligence means a lot of things to a lot of different people, but it means something very specific to the gatekeepers for the very best clients. And if we as practitioners can resonate with what due diligence means to them, then we have access to more referrals, more relationships with centers of influence, more business.
I think you hit on a big demographic issue, and now you've made it into a sales strategy.
Absolutely.
We're trying to get into guys that really matter, the people who write the checks, make the call. And those people are looking at this kind of level of scrutiny on policies and the carriers behind them.
Absolutely.
So there's no doubt in my mind that if we're going to go down this road, this could be a strategy that could actually increase your marketing online. I mean, if I'm online and I'm putting out issues about due diligence, due care, I'm putting out product analysis, I'm looking and really I'm beyond the normal spreadsheet where I'm just ranking by premium.
Correct.
Now I'm looking at something that really quantifies it. For a regular producer, can a regular producer get his arms around the basics of due diligence?
Absolutely. When I first started in the financial services business, I was doing due diligence on mutual funds and pension investments, and the only way I was able to do that was because there were tools like Morningstar available. And there are a whole host of tools, some of whom you've had on your show before, that empower the everyday producer to be able to do due diligence in a way much more substantive, much more meaningful, and much more consistent with the way CPAs, tax attorneys, and trust officers think about due diligence than in the past.
Well, no, see, I want to go back down this road. This is the second time you brought this up in our segment. I think this is a natural marketing way to get into this fiduciary community with attorneys that deal in estate and probate, with CPAs, of course, because they have huge audit issues. They have huge 1040 practices. And now we're talking about trust officers who are overseeing ILITs and other forms that we use. So I just think that this is a way to get in. And by the way, a lot of people are looking to elevate their practice. This is an elevation to a practice. So tell me, when I'm thinking about this, if I'm a regular advisor and I want to make this an adjunct into my practice, how would I go about that? What would be the first thing I'd look at from a due diligence point of view?
You can start holistically, or you can start in some of the individual steps. Holistically, I would familiarize myself with a document called the Best Practice Standards for Life Insurance Stewardship. It takes an established due diligence framework that was created some 30 years ago, that's commonplace in the investment business, that wealth managers use every day in their practices, that RIAs use every day in their practices, that CPAs and tax attorneys are familiar with, that trust officers have to use. So this best practices for life insurance stewardship takes this framework and applies it to life insurance for the first time as of April of last year.
Well, when I'm thinking about importing this into my practice for the first time, and I want to dip my toe into this, this is the kind of thing that I think could be very revolutionary for some, because I think some people, once they see this, they'll say, I want to adopt that. And this best practices, which is common and has been around for 30 years, Barry, I'm certain most of my advisors are going, what did he just say? We come back from the break. We're going to continue our introduction into why due diligence matters and why it could be a major impact player in your practice. We'll be right back. Back in the day, life insurance professionals were called field underwriters. Then, carriers trained their field force in the basics of life insurance underwriting. Today, the insurance industry doesn't educate the agent population as they once did. But now you can have the Informed Risk Guide at your fingertips so you can illustrate a reasonable rate class for your life insurance prospects. Just request your copy of the Informed Risk Guide at downtobusiness.ashbrokerage.com. It's free from Ash Brokerage, the practice enhancement company. Well, welcome back to segment 2, of course, with Barry Flagg, and he's talking about due diligence and why it matters to your practice. Barry, we're not talking about comparing illustrations here.
No.
Talk about that, because I think most people say, well, you mean I'm just going to go ahead and publish 2 proposals, 3 proposals, compare the notes, see which one delivers the better deal, and that's due diligence.
Correct. Even though the chief regulatory body of the financial services industry has since published guidance saying that that practice can be misleading, and they actually strictly prohibit it for the products they have jurisdiction over, even though the Society of Actuaries commissioned a study concluding that comparing illustrations to figure out which product is better is not just inappropriate, it is fundamentally inappropriate, even though the OCC published a handbook in August of 2012 concluding that illustrations are highly volatile and thus not very useful for making long-term comparisons. It was the only way to do it for the longest time. Well, as I mentioned in the first segment, there are now a host of tools, and what Veralytic does is Veralytic actually takes the actual expense representations that the carrier makes that's inside that illustration.
Now, when you're talking about the current company practice, right?
Correct. But then it also evaluates, does that company have a practice of changing their pricing? Do they have a practice of changing their pricing for the better? Do they have a practice of changing their pricing where a kind of bait and switch, where they publish one pricing at the point of sale, but then increase pricing down the road? So it measures both current practices but also historical practices, examining what the carrier's actual cost representations are separate from performance assumptions, and then separately evaluates, are the performance assumptions reasonable? Are we investing in an asset class that is likely to deliver on the expected performance?
So you just brought up an interesting point here, because I think people don't look at the past history as a kind of a measurement tool, right? And now we're saying, well, I wonder what the carrier's behavior is.
Correct.
What have they been in the past?
Correct.
And that would be, I think that would bring a whole new level to the table. You would be looking at not only illustrations, which in and of themselves are really incomplete.
Correct.
At least if I'm hearing you correctly.
Absolutely.
But now we're adding another thing to the top of the table here, and in our thinking, is that I have to look at the historicity of the carrier to see whether or not they have good behavior, they've been true blue to their numbers, they're holding, in fact, actually in the old days, I haven't seen too much of this lately, in the old days, we'd have carriers that would actually put in a bailout provision. If they raise the current company practice of cost of insurance, you could walk without a surrender charge. Correct. I don't see too many of those out there right now.
But that was a great practice for whatever reason, probably because it's a very obscure number and people didn't know necessarily whether one carrier was changing their COIs and another carrier wasn't. So why provide a bailout provision when your competition didn't have a bailout position and didn't get penalized for not having a bailout position? Life insurance is the only asset that I'm aware of on clients' balance sheets or in their estate plans where historical performance is given almost no credence.
Well, I think one of the, and correct me if you think this is wrong, but I'm thinking if I have guaranteed term Guaranteed premium, guaranteed duration. If I have guaranteed universal life to a certain point in time, I'm thinking that price isn't going to change. It's not going to really alter. Out of sight, out of mind. I think that's kind of maybe part of our thing, because we have two main products that are really the big indemnification products of our industry, and we really have those are already locked down numbers. So I think people kind of drift away. It's when you get into the index products and current assumption UL and other carriers, or I'm sorry, other product lines, where I think we get into this kind of mathematics. But that being said, we talked about this in last night's dinner. We talked about guaranteed UL, secondary guarantees, and all of a sudden clients were getting billed greater than their so-called guaranteed premium. So I mean, we have had to change some of this, and now AG 38, of course, had a major impact on that. Talk a little bit about that as we close out our section. When we're looking at due diligence and we have regulations that are coming in online, I mean, I remember if any regulation we ever needed we had vanishing premiums back in the early 90s that didn't vanish. We still didn't apply any regulatory issues, really. I mean, I don't know of any legislation to correct that so that there's not this kind of advertisement versus performance.
Right.
But talk a little bit about how AG 38, because that did impact how we play.
I think it impacted more the carrier's internal pricing mechanics than it did impact advertising versus analytics, if you will. And I make a lot of analogies to the investment business, just because I think CPAs, tax attorneys, and trust officers understand the investment business a whole lot more than the life insurance business. So if you analogize a GUL or a term policy where the duration is fixed, the premium is fixed, the death benefit is fixed, it's all guaranteed. It's like a CD. And most of the risk is on the financial institution, with the exception of some of these contractual vagaries that can give rise to higher premiums, not necessarily higher costs, but higher premiums on the insured. It's that whole pool of variable life, universal life, indexed universal life, which is the bulk of the in-force business out there, where there is $3 trillion of cash values that almost nobody knows what they're being charged. Almost no one knows what they're actually getting in performance. That's where the real opportunity to use due diligence as a marketing strategy resides.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's show. Remember, before moving forward with any of the ideas you hear on our show, always consult your tax advisor, legal counsel, or broker-dealer compliance officer. And don't forget, you can view any of our past episodes at downtobusiness.ashbrokerage.com. And remember, you could be wiser as an Ash Brokerage advisor. I'm Steve Savant. We'll see you tomorrow.